Welcome to this new series, How to Improve Your 3D Art. And in this series, we're going to be taking a look at multiple 3D projects. And I'm going to be giving feedback on areas to improve. Keep in mind that all the feedback I'll be giving is according to my own opinion and it's not a fact. Having said that, big thanks to all the amazing 3D artists that send in the work for feedback. And if you do want to receive any feedback yourself, there will be a link in the description to the Discord channel where you can go ahead and post your work to receive feedback. So this one's really interesting in my opinion, because it's a very solid looking character. All the detail work's very nice, the texture work's looking good as well. We have an interesting background going on. The main issue with this character is the proportions. Sometimes, actually this happens quite often, when you're making a 3D character and then you look at the final result, the scale looks a little bit off and starts to look like a 3D thing. Like it just looks 3D, kind of toy-like. And whenever that happens, it's because the proportions are off. There's pretty much three things that like really push this toy-like proportion forward. And the first thing is going to be the head is a little bit too big, just with the big cap around it and the big mask. Then this is something that happens a lot in characters. The buckle. Whenever you do a buckle, like the metal clasp or buckle, however you want to call it, at the belt, whenever that's too big, it starts to look a little bit stylized or toy-like. And then the upper body is slightly short. And it's a shame because if we look at, for example, this shot, we have so much good things going in the character. I think the strongest point is the texture work that you put in this, especially the wear and tear. It looks super good. It looks super natural. Like this tear just looks like it belongs. So very nice on that. Be careful a little bit with the UVs. Like if we take a look here, we can see that the pattern starts to stretch a little bit. So it looks like the UV isn't quite relaxed over there. And then the leather part is probably a little bit too wet looking. So the roughness could be a little bit more white, because a little bit too shiny. Maybe the same applies for the head cloth over here. It's pretty shiny as well. I do like the leather values on the mask though. I think that works very well. And I'm pretty sure it's the same material, but because this is like the face and it draws more attention, you can get away with a more shiny leather a little bit better than, for example, the shoulder pads. Also the dirt on the arm is looking very nice. So I went ahead and put the character in Photoshop and I did some moving around with the proportions to try to illustrate the point. So over here we have the original render. And if we take a quick look at before and after, you can see by making the upper body a little bit longer, the head a little bit less big, it's making the character feel much more realistic. Also, I adjusted the bend a little bit for the skirt to make her feel a little bit more realistic as well. So you can see it does a lot for the character. We go from having a slightly like toy look on the character to having a much more believable, realistic looking character. You can see we didn't touch anything of the design pretty much. Texture's all the same. It's just about moving some parts around and messing with the proportions. So then another thing that we can do is have this little folder here. And what this does, it's just messing with the background a little bit. You can see we're having some of like that toxic green. It's becoming a little bit darker and less visible around the head, giving it a little bit of a breakup in the background. So we have about 70% like this nice toxic gas. And then on the top of the head, it's just a nice black. And this is going to help make the character pop a little bit better out of the background. And then what we're also missing is a light that hits the mask. So I just went ahead and upped the exposure a little bit for the face. And you can see this draws a little bit more attention to the face. Usually whenever you're rendering a character, you want to make sure that you add light near the head, because the main focal point of any character And then lastly, my painting skills aren't the best, but I would try to like have the folds of the cloth. I would try to have the folds of the cloth break the silhouette up a little bit. So if we take a little zoom in, you can see that right now the cloth is very tight to the body and it isn't creating the most interesting silhouette. By making that a little bit stronger on the silhouette, we get a little bit more of a believable result. So as you can see, it just breaks up the silhouette a little bit. So my main recommendation is whenever you finish a project like this and you're doing the final renders and you see that it's feeling like a little bit off the proportions, is to just take a step backwards. Just take your low poly, put it in ZBrush, or you can even do it in Maya, Blender, or whatever. You just want to move the proportions a little bit. For example, you can just take your whole low poly, put it in ZBrush, and start going with the move tool to try to adjust the proportions a little bit. Or if you want to do it in Maya, you can just take like a lattice modifier or an FFT modifier for Max, or however you want to call it. And you just start moving some points around with the soft select. And you try to fix the proportions up a little bit. And then also I forgot to mention, whenever we have a glass, usually it looks a little bit more realistic if you get like a nice reflection on it. So just edit a really quick reflection in it with Photoshop. And you can either try to get this from your render in Unreal Engine or Marmoset, whatever you're using. Or if you're not able to get a nice reflection, you can always go ahead and just fake the reflection in Photoshop. It's totally okay to do some post touch-ups. So yeah, overall, I think this is a really, really strong piece. The texturing came out great. You have a very nice, good mood on the character. The only thing that went wrong is the proportions. So I would recommend to either fix it up a little bit or just to keep it in mind for the next project. As you do see, it makes a huge difference. But yeah, nonetheless, it's an awesome looking character. So good job. So it looks really, really good. Let's take a good look at some of the nice details. So we got a lot of detail work in the textures. We have some fingerprints, got nice scratches, some dirt here and there, some discoloration. It's all looking good. I like the renders that you did with the background and then some renders with multiple shots. So very nice. Maybe the push is a little bit too pronounced, the height. Like it's looking a little bit with a black outline. Could be toned down just slightly. Could also help to like either make it a little bit darker or a little bit lighter, like the albedo within the lattice, just to break it up a little bit the colors. And that's pretty much the same for all these grooves and like shapes. So to give you a quick example of what I mean, let's go ahead and take this into Photoshop. So I paint a quick mask and we can just go ahead and like tone that down. And of course you don't want to do it as pronounced, but you can see if we just slightly do it and we zoom out a little bit, it gives it a nice breakup. Like right now, everything is looking a little bit like too similar in color. And that's just because of the material, of course, because it's just a single like plastic radio. But in my opinion, this usually looks a little bit nicer if you give it like a slight, artistic touch. You go ahead and you darken some of these areas out a little bit. And then usually you want to keep it pretty subtle. So you could also like justify it as being like, okay, it's a little bit of occlusion. But that just gives you a little bit more breakup. And then the main thing for me that you could improve on in this project is the final render. Like everything looks very nice, but looks a little tiny bit flat in a sense. So for example, I did some quick adjustments. And I'm trying to push a little bit more contrast in the render and try to bring a little bit more attention to the actual center of the image. So if we take a quick look, you can kind of see that we have like this brighter circle right in the middle, which helps to just focus a little bit more on the radio. So let's go ahead and zoom in. So also what I wanted to do is like add a little bit more contrast and sharpness to the radio itself. So for example, if we go ahead and turn that off and on, you can see that all the amazing details that you did in Substance Painter, if we add a little bit more contrast to the radio, they start to pop a little bit more, and they are a little bit easier to see, which is really nice. Because I think one of the strongest points of the project is all the nice details that you put into the texture. So we should try to make that as visible as possible. Of course, we shouldn't overdo it. For example, if we just add a contrast, and another one. Like if we do something like this, it's gonna be like super, super, super pronounced. So we should do it in a way that it's like pronounced, but it isn't like distracting. And also, of course, it's up a little bit to personal taste. But usually I like my renders to be a little bit more contrasted and have the details pop a little bit. Especially when you put so much effort into them. And then I'm only doing like the extra contrast on the radio and not the whole background, because we don't want to draw more attention to the background. So yeah, very small change to the render, but in my opinion it helps a bit by putting a little bit more focus on the subject itself. So yeah, hope that makes sense. But again, overall it's looking very good. And let's also take a look at your low poly. So first observation, this is looking extremely clean. It's looking very, very nice. So let's have a little bit of a closer look. One of the first things that kind of pops out to me is that it's pretty consistent, the low poly, but it could use a little bit more consistency. For example, if we take a look over here like this, we are using a hard edge for this border. And then for all these things, we're using a bevel. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. We should decide on one way to do it. Either we use bevels or we use hard edges. But we should try to avoid like mixing and matching that. And there's one exception. If you say, okay, I'm gonna use like bevels on like every top, and then everywhere where I'm gonna put a UV cut, I'm gonna put a hard edge. That will be my exception, and that way you're still being consistent with it. But since we're using a UV cut here anyway, we might as well keep it consistent by getting rid of those bevels, so it's a little bit more consistent, the mesh. But it's a very small minor thing. So let's go ahead and have a quick look at the UVs. So when you're doing UVs, I would recommend to try to keep it like nice and straight. Like everything's looking pretty straight, but for example, if we have a piece like this, like since it's so straight already, we might as well just pull it a little bit straighter. And after pulling it straight, you just do an unfold to relax it again, just to make it nice and straight. And all the same for here, like this should be nice and straight, so just straighten it out. This is gonna make it look a little bit more polished, and you can get lucky with the mip mapping. But again, since we're doing like a very high fidelity portfolio piece, it's not gonna make a difference like the way it looks in the render. But if this was like a game asset and we didn't have so much budget, this could help a little bit. And generally it's just a good practice. Let's take a quick look at the second set. So same thing over here, all this we could pull straight very nicely. Then we can just go ahead and relax that. This is just gonna make it look a little bit nicer. Same thing over here, for example, a piece like this. I'm just gonna go ahead and move it out a little bit. So that also seems to be flipped the wrong way. Now it doesn't really matter too much, but now let's just do it like that. This is something that I usually do for all my UV pieces, like after unfolding them and relaxing them, however you want to call it, I'll go in and I'll start like straightening out the straight edges by hand, just to make sure everything's nice and straight on my UVs. You can see the difference that makes. It's a minor difference, but it just makes it look a lot nicer. And it's also gonna pack a little bit nicer. And in case you're doing like any texture work on it, like more traditionally, where you're like painting on the UV island directly instead of like projecting something, having this straight would help as well. But yeah, overall it's looking pretty nice, the UVs. Maybe I would add slightly more edge padding as they're getting quite close together, the UV islands. But again, for portfolio pieces, it doesn't really matter too much. The main thing that I would do is like make sure to pull the UV straight. For example, a piece like this, that we can just take all those UVs and straighten it out, and it's just gonna be nice and perfect. So yeah, overall, very clean looking mesh. Very nice UVs as well. And a very nice end result. It's a really, really strong project. So good job. So I wanted to really quickly share that I do have my own course platform. If you do sign up, you get access to all the courses that we have. So for now, the main courses that we do have is a complete guide to texturing in Substance Painter. And we'll also have a course where we're scripting ZBrush plugins, and it's very friendly for artists. So you can make some cool tools yourself. And right now I'm hard at work at making a new course that's aimed at people that want to learn 3D character art. We do have a few chapters already where we dive into the complete basics of 3D. And eventually we'll get to the complicated chapters where we're making whole characters. So yeah, if you're interested in learning what I do, the link will be down in the description. And again, if you do sign up for the courses, you get access to all of the courses on the platform. I think this is one of the most interesting characters of the review, because in my opinion, the model is quite nice. They've got some really good details going on. The proportions are pretty good as well. But the thing that's really killing your work is the way that you're presenting the work. So what does that mean? Right now we have a very, very bright background, almost to the point where it hurts to look at, because it's just so white. Also, the character seems to be standing crooked, like he's not straight, he's standing on an angle instead of being straight. Then also, whenever you do a render, you want to try to leave a little bit of space between the top and the bottom. So it's like a little bit of a breathing area. Or you want to go like pretty much that like it's being cut off over here and being cut off over here. But if you're like right on the end, it looks a little bit awkward. And you want to try to match like the same distance of the bottom to the top, just so the character's framed a little bit better. You can see in this one's very prominent, like we have a lot more space on the top than the back, than the bottom. Also, when you're presenting like a shot like this, where you're just focusing on the clothing, I would recommend to just take the body and put like a flat color on it, so it looks a little bit less empty. Also, everything seems to be out of focus on here, so that isn't great. In my opinion, this is one of the strongest shots. Like, if we take a good look here, we can see that we have some very nice detailing. That's definitely the strongest point of the character. Then we also have some nice colors on the scales, which looks very good. Whenever we're doing a high poly, it's always a good idea to give it like a little bit of a pose. So spend a little bit of time just to get the arms down and whatever you want to do with it. Just so it looks a little bit more appealing to look at than the T-pose. But yeah, like I said, I don't think the model or the textures itself is the main problem on this project. Because I think the textures look very strong. The model's pretty decent as well. Got some nice cloth going on as well. But the way that you're presenting everything could be improved a lot. And just by adjusting that, it's going to make your project look a lot better. So what I did is just went into Photoshop and I tried to present it a little bit better. So if we take a quick look at pretty much what changed, is first of all the main thing, like we got rid of the very bright background and we have like a nice looking forest or whatever. And you don't need to go ahead and model like a whole forest. You can just find a HDRI sky and use that as a background. Then have it like nice and blurred. If we go ahead and take away the sky though, so we can compare it a little bit closer to each other. The other main thing is like we made sure that the character is standing straight. We made the background a little bit less bright. And then something very important is we added some shadow. Right now, the character feels like it's floating into space. It doesn't feel very grounded because it's not straight and it doesn't have any type of shadow. So by just adding some shadow and making the character stand up straight, it's going to look a lot more professional and a lot better. So let's go ahead and go a little bit over the layers, just to kind of see what we're doing. Also, it's always a good idea to add a little bit of a gradient going from the bottom to top to give that background a little bit more depth, even if we're using like a flat color background. So now let's put this one back, because I do recommend that you have like a nice little background. Then one thing that we're doing as well is we're adding some color correction. So if I turn this off, you can see that the characters are lacking a little bit of contrast and everything looks a little bit washed out. So if we mess a little bit with levels and a little bit with colors and exposure and curves, we can get a little bit more contrast in the character, which is going to make some of the elements pop a little bit. Then also to draw a little bit more attention to the head is I just made a quick duplicate. And I made that a little bit more exposed. But like when you have the way you would like get this into theory into your like model is either when you do the renders, like you make sure that you have a light shining on top of the face, or you could go ahead in the textures and you could make the face a little bit more brighter. But like most likely you'd have like a light in Marmoset that hits the face, just so it draws a little bit more attention to there. And we definitely want to draw as much attention as we can to the face, because in my opinion, the body itself is the strongest point of the character. So whenever you have like a strong point in a character, the more attention that you can draw to that, the better it's gonna be. So yeah, overall it's a pretty good model. The biggest downfall that you're having right now is the way that you're presenting your work. So quick comparison. You can see that one starts to look a lot better. So yeah, I would definitely recommend to either go back or on your next project to spend a little bit more time thinking about how you want to present your work and what areas you want to put focus on in the renders. But overall, it's a pretty nice looking character. So this one looks very, very cool. I really like how unique the design looks. It's a very nice like blend between like alien-like, devil-like, angel-like, and like with nature. So I think that's really nice. The flowers look very nice with like the hanging, like according to your description, like slime. I think it's a really nice mix. Also the colors of the bright yellow with the dark mix really well. It's a really nice main shot. Back shot looks really nice as well. Everything's looking very, Nice. So I don't have too much to say about design. I think it works pretty well. I like all the detailing that you did. The only thing when it comes to like the sculpt, for example, the sculpt is getting a little bit wobbly in some areas. So for example, you can see a lot of like these rounded, like wobbly ball shapes back into the sculpt. That could be cleaned a little bit better. And then the surface detailing that you did, in some areas it's a little bit too like horizontal. Like we have these very strong horizontal stripes going all over the surface without like a clear like direction or purpose. So for example, if you're gonna put like some horizontal stripes in, it would be better to make those more vertical, so they follow the shape of your, like, how would you call that, like plates. So you can start doing some here and here. That's gonna break up that surface a little bit as well. You can add some over here. That way we can make the surface look a little bit less repeating. So right now that everything, because right now everything's looking a little bit too repeated. Now, for example, the noise that you're adding is very nice, but it would be nice, for example, if we keep this plate without noise, and then maybe the plates on the side over here, we can add noise. So it's a little bit more breakup, because the main thing that we're looking for is to break up the surfaces a little bit more, because everything's looking very similar. Over here we just have noise, 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 noise. And then we have like these like slimy areas without noise. I think you should try to find like some of these plated areas and avoid having noise on it. Just have a little bit more breakup. But again, it's very minor feedback, as there isn't too much to say about the high poly, because it does look very clean. Whenever you're doing like the surface noise in ZBrush, you do want to be careful with how you apply it. I would recommend, if you're doing like these complicated like pipe things, that you set up some UVs for them, and that you tell the displacement on a UV. Because right now, if we're looking, for example, to this one, you can see that the projection is getting very, very stretched on the side, which isn't very great. So if you do it by doing some UVs, you wouldn't have that issue. And if you don't want to, make sure that you spend like some time after the projection to clean up the problematic areas. That would also help by, like, if you set up UVs, you have a little bit more control over like how it goes directionality. So right now we have like this, like the directionality of the tube. And then if we take a look at like the actual detail that's on it, it kind of seems to start wrapping around, which could be a little bit nice if it follows the flow a little bit better. But that's about it. Like I said, it's looking super, super cool. Just some minor things that maybe could push the sculpt a little bit further. And for example, in the head, like it's quite simple. Like we could start breaking up these shapes a little bit more by adding like some detailing. Right now we pretty much have our primary shapes and the secondary shapes, but we're missing some of that tritary detailing. So you could just do like some crossing and whatever, and you could add some surface detail in some areas, just to help make it look a little bit more complicated. Then maybe in some of like these cavities, we could pronounce that a little bit stronger to make the mesh look a little bit more defined, as it's getting a little bit blobby in some of these areas. But that's about it. Overall, it's looking very strong. We also have another nice little concept painting. It's looking very cool. I do like what you did with orbs here, with like slime coming off. I think that could have been cool to add as well. I also want to do a really, really quick rough paint over with some ideas that could have pushed the piece a little bit further, in my opinion. Design-wise, I think it's very, very strong. So pretty much all that I did was push your design a little bit further. If we zoom in a little bit, like one of the main things that I think could use some improvement is to make the piece look a little bit more complicated. Right now it's quite simple in terms of we have like one big shape. And then we have like some nice smaller shapes to break that shape up. And then behind it we have some glowing straps. And I think it works really well, but I think if you just make a little bit more of these hanging like slime things, it's gonna make the piece look better. So if we add a little bit more, like we're just using your design and pushing it further. And this way it's gonna look a little bit more broken up. And that's also gonna make it look a little bit more organic and more like nature-like. Because we have a very strong theme of nature already with the flowers and the veins. I think it will be good if you push that a little bit more. In this way it's gonna add a lot more complexity and breakup to the model. And we don't really need to think about how we place them. It's just about placing them and breaking up the silhouette a bit. So it looks a little bit more complicated. Another thing that I think would be really cool is if we add like a little top flower that's a little bit bigger than the others and it's not like fully sprouted yet. Like the flower is like growing out and it's like halfway there. That's like on top of the neck. Just add like a little bit more of a focal point to like the top of the body. I think what you have right now is pretty nice. But if we just make that a little bit bigger and more chaotic, I think it draws a little bit more attention to this whole area. And it makes it feel a little bit nicer. I think you could also add like some more like flowers to the ends of things over here. Just to break up the colors a little bit and break up that silhouette. And that way we're also adding more complexity again. What I would do though is like these flowers, make them a little bit like lighter and less saturated. So they're like blending in a little bit more with like the body. And then also like at the body, like have a little bit of yellowish there. Because we don't want these flowers to stand out like as strong as some of the others. So they should just add like a nice touch of color and break the silhouette. And then lastly, what I think would be a really nice touch is that you have these orbs. If we just make them look a little bit more complicated and do some cool stuff with them. So for example, I did a really quick painting that they just glowing like a yellow light with some purple inside of them. And I think this works pretty well. I think it makes them look more interesting and also draws back to the yellow colors of the flowers. It's just to make them like a little bit more interesting, as it's a very good opportunity because right now they kind of look like floating balls of glass and they aren't too interesting to look at. So if you can get some light on them and everything, I think it's a very nice touch. Also, I did ignore the underbody, but like all the same like things would be applied to the underbody, adding a little bit more veins here and there, maybe adding like some yellow to the ends of the feet. So let's take a quick look at before and after. So you can see we're not really changing much, we're just expanding on the design that we already have. And we're trying to make it look a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complex. But yeah, like I said, I think this is a very, very strong piece overall. And it's a very nice design. And I think we could expand a little bit more on that design to make it look a little bit more strong. The piece. But yeah, really, really cool work and very cool design. So to start off, this looks incredible. I really like the texture work that you've done on it. And all the bevels are super nice, the shapes. So amazing job. I'm just gonna take a little look at all the images. The dust is really nice over here by having that smear. Looks very believable. Some nice breakdowns as well of the topology. And some of the UVs. So let's get into some feedback. There isn't too much I have to say about it as it's really, really done nicely. but there's a few small little notes. So I found a reference. We're just gonna go ahead and compare some areas. So the first area that catched my attention, also it's gonna be a little bit more visible on this image, is the inputs over here. If we quickly compare them to the reference, they're matching pretty well, but if you take a close look, the inside is yellow, white, and red. So they have the color of the ring. It's not just the ring. So you can see that's a little bit off as we're just coloring the ring. But it's a very minor detail, but something that's worth capturing. Then the second thing that looks a little bit off is we have a lot of nice wear and tear on it, and it looks very believable and it's very nice and dirty. But then once we get to like the cavities on top, they look pretty clean. So it's this like, if you think about the profile, it would be something like this. So we have a little hole. So you'd expect some dust and dirt buildup in there as it's an older looking asset. So we should have some of that dust go in here and whatever. It's missing some dirt there. Let's take a look if we can see that in the reference as well. So you can see in the reference, like we have some more. It's a little bit hard to tell if it's like dirt or dust or like just broken up material. But you can definitely see you have a lot of stuff going in on those cavities. Then once we compare it to this one, it's looking pretty clean. It's pretty much the same. Like if I were to copy paste this, and we take a little section of this and a little section of this, like it pretty much looks like the same material. But I mean, it's the same material, but like it looks like there's no difference between this cavity section and the top section. We should be having some dirt and some messed up edges in there. Then the other big thing for me is this glass or plastic. I think it's like a nice reflective shine through plastic. Like if we compare it to the reference, this is a little bit hard to tell exactly what it is. Like to me, it looks a little bit too much like just like a block of pretty dark reflective material, and it doesn't look that interesting. Like it's pretty much just a black box. If we compare it to the reference, we can see through it a little bit more, and we have a lot of nice like, purple hues. There's a little bit of like a purple hue, but there's no like see-through at all. And the purple hue isn't strong enough. And I think this whole like bar is a really good opportunity to break up the colors a little bit, because we have so much dark and black everywhere that over here it would be really nice to push those purples a little bit more, so we have a nice bit of color in the asset. For the rest, that's pretty much it. Everything's looking super nice. I really like all the wear that you have, for example on the sticker, on the letters, and all these nice little white dust particles. Then the other thing is the UVs. I think you could present the UVs a little bit nicer. Right now it's a little bit hard to actually like see the UVs. So put a little bit more like thought into how you present the UVs themselves. And then when it comes to the UVs themselves, we have a lot of UVs that look like they were done like a little bit in a hurry. For example, if we just take a look here, we have this whole UV island. And one next to it as well that's pretty bent. We could easily go ahead and like straighten that out so we get a better packing. And that pretty much repeats it all over the UVs. Like if we take a look at this piece, since it's so straight, I highly prefer to just pull the whole UV straight, even if that introduces some very minor stretching. Like a lot of times, in my opinion, it's worth it to to pull the UV straight, even if it causes like minor stretching, you're not gonna see it. And it's gonna make sure that you can pack your UVs a lot nicer and tighter. There's some questionable pieces as well. For example, if you have a very, very curly piece, a lot of times with a little bit of like manual unfolding, you can get them into a nice straight strip. But again, this is pretty subjective. Like maybe there's no way but to make it look like that, because it's a little bit difficult to tell just to look to the UVs. But generally speaking, all of these bent pieces, they can pretty much all be pulled straight, and you're gonna get a much better time laying out your UVs. But for the rest, they do look pretty nice and tight. The packing is pretty tight. Some of the bigger pieces are nice and straight. So overall, pretty good job. And yeah, that goes for the whole asset, and overall it's looking really, really good. I think it's a very, very strong piece. So as the main project, we're going to be focusing on the work of Mustafa. It's a very cool project, and I think the end result is very, very nice. So let's have a quick look at the final render. We also have the concept. Then we got some breakdown images. I really like this shot where you can like see the topology on it. Looks very nice, the transition. And then we do also have some high poly work. So let's start off. Oh, also we do have these breakdowns, which are pretty cool. They're very nice and clear. And some of them marvelous. So to start off, let's have a quick look at the final model compared to the concept. So I think the mood is captured pretty nicely. You can see the concept back a lot in the final model, so that's very nice. I would say the main thing that's different from the concept to the actual 3D model is going to be the hair is a bit different, and the expression is a little bit less expressed in the 3D. Although it's not bad, because it's just a slight change and still looks good. So let's do some closer comparison between the concept and the final mesh. So one thing that's sticking out to me right away is going to be the shoulder armor. So if we go ahead and compare it to the reference, it's a little bit more of a basic shape and we're missing some volume. So over here we have a bigger rounded shape. Then we have the cape falling over. And over here we're losing a little bit of that roundness and it's becoming a little bit more square. And we do have like a little bit less width. So if we were to compare it to the concept, it would be extending a little bit more and we'd have a little bit more curvature. I also think that the details that you did, they're a little bit more difficult to read than in the concept. In the concept, they're a little bit bigger and then they go into smaller details, but that's making it a little bit easier to read in general. The cape as well, it would have been nice if we captured a little bit more of the wear and tear of the original cape in the concept. Because right now the cape's looking pretty perfect and it would have been a nice touch to get some of that wear of the concept in. Then looking at the blood, it looks a little bit too much just like a random noise applied in Substance Painter. If we look, for example, in the concept, you can see that the blood is painted a little bit more intentional. It looks a little bit more like she just ended up slaying a monster or an enemy or whatever. And because it's like a little bit more subtle but like noisy, it kind of just makes it look like a procedural instead of like some well thought placed blood. But again, these are very minor points. Overall, it's looking really good. So overall, the concept's translated very nicely in 3D. The hair looks incredible. The face is also really nice. Don't have a lot to say about that. It's looking really good, so good job. From what we can see, topology looks nice and clean as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the high poly, and we're also gonna take the concept next to it, just in case. So the first thing that stands out to me right away is the symmetry that we have going on the chainmail. So we have a pretty strong symmetry line in the middle. And it's creating like this X-like direction. So that could have been improved if we didn't have a visible symmetry line. I do like how it's not ending like perfectly, like we have some missing here and then we have a few extra. So the breakup in that line is very nice. Then, like I mentioned earlier, the shoulder armor could be a little bit bigger to match the concept a little bit. And also it would give a little bit more shape to the silhouette. I think right now, in general, the silhouette is looking a little bit like tied to the body. Meaning that pretty much all the armor, like it's being pushed very, very close against the actual body. We're not breaking up the silhouette too much of the character. Like it could have been nice to be a little bit more bold with some of these, just to create like a little bit more silhouette. And for example, over here, when you get like that stepping, just push them out a little bit, so we get a stronger silhouette. Then if we take a look at the chest plate, this is looking pretty nice. But then once we get to the ornamental detail, it's put in a little bit sloppy. Like it could have been cleaned up a little bit better by maybe going with the damn standard, like over it a few times and pinching it and just making it look a little bit sharper. And then we probably could have added like a little bit more curvature to this. So the armor becomes a little bit like easier on her to wear, like when she moves around, that her shoulder isn't like bumping into it so much, and would also create for a slightly nicer shape. Then we also need to take into mind that the armor should be functional. Right now, if we take a look at like this piece over here, it's pretty much being held together just by a single strap. And then we have like these metal bolts, they're like being like punctured in, and those hold on to the other plates themselves. But it doesn't make a lot of sense because we're missing a strap. Like right now, the only place where it's being held together is like right here. And then this is just hanging free and it's just like attached only here, which is not gonna be like enough. So we should have added like one more strap right here, or like a little bit higher or lower, it doesn't really matter, but something here on the top to make it like functional. This part's looking very nice, the gauntlet. Really like the paneling that you did on it. Same thing here, this could have been curved a little bit more. Because right now we're having a lot of like almost like very straight lines in the model. Especially those shoulder pads are like really like almost cube shaped. And then we have another one. Would have been nice if we tried to like have a little bit less of them. We also could have like extended this a little bit, so there's a little bit more space. Right now, like it kind of looks like a perfectly like fitted armor. This way we would break that silhouette up a little bit more as well. And by having like this triangle in the silhouette, we'd be like repeating the design language of all like these nicely plated triangles that we have going all over the character. So it looks very cool. I like the handle a lot. Same thing for the boots. I think we could have been a little bit more bold on that silhouette. Add a little bit like more space. So the silhouette gets broken up a little bit better. Also, I do think like the amount of details that you put in the leather boots, it's really nice. I think you should try to aim to put that kind of detailing in all of the surfaces that you do. So if we take a look at the leather boots compared to the cloth pretty much has no detailing going on as well. It's all done by the textures. And what I would aim for is that you can pretty much tell like what material is what when you're doing the sculpt. So if you're sculpting like metal, don't be afraid to add like some scratches here and there, some imperfections, rough up the edges a little bit, so it starts to look nicely detailed. Just like you're doing with the leather, like sculpt some detail work in it. And then you can use the textures to just add more detail and to refine. But overall, it's looking really good, the high poly as well. We're going to take a closer look at the low poly in Maya. And the cloth simulation is looking really good as well. Looks very nice. It's a very good base to work on. One thing that I'm curious about though is if we go to the pants, they look symmetrical, which doesn't make the most sense when you're doing a marvelous base. Like usually you only want to do the symmetrical pants if you're planning on either mirroring the texture because you're low on resources, like you have a tight budget, or if you're tight on the deadline. But if you're doing any personal work, I wouldn't recommend to mirror and weld like big folds like pants and boots and whatever, because it will just push your character forward a little bit more in quality if it's not perfectly symmetrical. But again, if you do want to save some time, it's fine. So let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper and start to take a look at the actual mesh. So we're just going to go ahead and jump in. So the first thing that I notice is that the density of polygons is quite uneven. Like if we take a look, for example, at this chest area here and the neck area, and then we have like these plates, the density is pretty nice and even. But then once we get to the shoulder pads, they're like twice as high in density. So generally speaking, you want to try to keep the same density in all of the character. Of course, there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, that's what you want to aim for. And let's have a look at the shading, for example. So shading is looking very nice. I'm not seeing any big issues pop up. The shading wise is very strong. There's a few little intersections going on that we should be careful about. Again, the density is way higher on this piece than the other ones. Also, right now it's a little bit unclear what the aim of the character is, like if this is meant to be a cinematic character or a game-ready character. Because at some points, like it looks cinematic, like in terms of like polygon budget. Like these are like really, really high for game, and then we have like these very high bolts and whatever. Then we have like the knee protector that doesn't have like the piece merged into it, and super dense, so that looks like super cinematic. And then we get to other areas. For example, strap over here, like it's very simple and basic and optimized and looks like a game asset. Then we have a few edges like over here that are not adding anything, like you can delete that and nothing will change. Unless we're using those for the UVs, but I don't think so. So no, we're also not using those for the UVs. So I think there could be a little bit more thought put into the low poly. with like really trying to be consistent with the density, either aim for like a cinematic density or a game density. And then if the aim is a game character, we should be more careful with like not having like unneeded edges like this and whatever. But overall it's looking pretty clean, the low poly. Now let's have a quick look at the UVs. So I definitely think we could optimize the UVs quite a lot. It's also a little bit unclean. Not quite sure what that is. Let me take a look. So those. Just gonna delete those. We don't need them. Also, there's some overlapping stuff. It's just because I didn't like lay out the UVs like most properly, but this should do. So I think the first UV that I would like improve on is the face. I'm just gonna make a duplicate. Let's go ahead and focus a little bit on the face. So the first thing that I would do is have like all this stuff of the mouth, the teeth and everything. I would just go ahead and place that in its own texture set. So I do think it's a little bit more clean to keep that separated. But again, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like up to personal preference. Also seemed like I deleted some faces there on accident, but we can ignore that. So the way I usually like to do this, also this is quite like opinion based, like this isn't like a right or wrong, but whenever I do a face, I try to get like the most resolution possible in the face. So the first thing I would do is like optimize all the space, like get it exactly on the border. Then I want to scale it down a little bit to give it some padding for the border. Then we can go ahead and unfold that, try to give it as much space as possible. And then for me, the most important thing, let me undo that, is not ruin the mouth. Actually, we can just fix the mouth later, it's okay. So what I was saying, for me, the most important thing when I'm unwrapping a face is to get as much texel density in the face as possible. So what does that mean? Is the part that we're going to be focusing on the most in the render. It's like this area is the area that you're pretty much going to be looking to. So I always like to give that the most space that I possibly can. So we can just take this, we can say we cannot say symmetry because it's not symmetrical, it's posed. I'm just going to do it more or less by hand. So I'm going to take this area. Let's go a little bit bigger. Maybe a little bit over here as well. So this is like the area that you're mostly going to be looking at. So this is the area that I want to give the most texel density to. So after selecting that, you can just go with soft select. And we can scale that all the way up. I want to make this really nice and big and give it a lot of space to work with. Then again, I'm just going to take the area around the eyes and even try to give that more resolution because it's a very important area. Then because the nose is like rounded, it's going to have like less texel density. So we're just going to go ahead and give that more space. And then finally, it's just about relaxing that again. Then you would go ahead and like fix up stuff like the mouth. I'm not going to take the time to make this like as good as it can, but you get the idea. It's just moving the UVs around using soft select and just relaxing it and going back and forward and making sure that there's no stretching. A little bit more resolution out of this. So we're just going to scale this up again. You saw that the nose still has a little bit less resolution. We're going to scale this up as well. And be careful that I don't destroy that mouth. And then again, we're just like relaxing the surrounding UVs. So let's have another look. For example, right now we have 137 on the nose. And then like on the side of the head, we have like half of the resolution, which is great. Got like 70, 129. The back of the head, that's not too bad because it's going to be visible at the neck. 118, 121, 152 for the cheeks, which is really nice. The eyes 150. So you can see how we're trying to like prioritize the texel density in the part of the face where we actually are going to be paying attention to the important areas around the eyes, the nose, and the lips. And then like if this has like less resolution, the ears, the side of the head, it's totally fine because we're not going to be focusing on that. And also it's going to be covered by hair. So if we quickly compare the old versus the new one, also something scary seems to be happening there. So if we just take the area around the eyes, right now we have a resolution of 82. And in the new one, we're getting a resolution of 170. So we doubled the resolution of the texture. And this is going to be a little bit more important when you're working with like a game asset, because you're going to be more limited on texture budget. If you're doing like a cinematic character, it doesn't really matter because you can just give everything a ridiculous amount of resolution anyway. So let's have a quick look at some other parts. So for example, the pants. If I can find them. They could have been rotated a little bit nicer, just so that any fabric detail that you put on them will actually follow the direction of the UV better, which is going to look more natural. Like the way that the details flow on the pattern. Also, we're having very little edge padding on some of these pieces, so be careful with that. Also, we could optimize these UVs a little bit. For example, if we take a look at the pants, we can see the pants, but then this piece is never going to be visible, or almost never going to be visible, because it's covered by other layers of clothing. So we don't need to give it like the same textile density. Like we could take these and make them smaller. Maybe if you put all the parts that are not going to be visible a little bit smaller, we could take all the visible parts and have them be a little bit bigger and would still fit in the layout. Then when stuff's like almost straight, I would recommend to just like take a little bit of time, go in by hand. And just straighten them out. And this is going to help give you a little bit of better time packing the UVs, which is going to result in a tighter pack, which is going to give you more resolution in the end to work with. Because a square will always just fit nice into space. Same for here, for example. For the arm, since it's like this straight, we might as well just go ahead and like straighten this out. And just have it like that. And again, this is going to pack a little bit more tight because it can just fit nicely like that. Although this is a preference thing, like you could argue that this is a little bit more accurate to the pattern, making the details of the fabric like behave a little bit more natural. So it's a little bit up to preference, but my preference is to try to straighten stuff out as much as I can. For example, if we have a UV like this, like we can pretty much take all this, straighten that out, make it straight and make it straight. And you get the idea. You can straighten a lot of stuff out like that. But yeah, overall it's looking pretty good as well, the UVs. So yeah, I don't have too much like to say in terms of feedback, because I think like overall speaking, it's a very, very solid, strong project and everything's looking quite nice already. The last part that I want to talk about, just like the other renders, I went in Photoshop and did like a little bit of an adjustment to the final render. I think this is a pretty nice render. I only have one issue with it, that it's a little bit dark, everything. And it's a little bit hard to actually take a look at what's going on. So I made a few adjustments. And in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to actually see all the hard work that went into the character. So let's go ahead and break down what we actually added. So we're just going to start off with the before. So the first thing that I would add is a little bit of a blur or motion blur to the background. Like if we compare the results, it's very slight, but like it gets rid of some of these like very grainy fine details on the water. It also helps a little bit with making those particles feel a little bit more realistic. And then we also added a little bit more blur to the borders of the image by blurring everything around the character. Just gonna group this together. By blurring everything around the character, it's gonna help put a little bit more focus back onto the character instead of the whole image. Then I do think that you made a very cool background. So we just brighten the whole background up so we can see like a little bit more of what's actually going on in the world, like around her. But that does like add a lot of attention to the background. So then we can add like a little bit of a gradient, get the outside to be a little bit darker. Then we also added another gradient from bottom to top. And by adding like a gradient that focuses on the middle of the image, and then another gradient like to darken all this out. So we're darkening everything around her out. So we're automatically starting to look more to the bright spot of the image, and we're going to be putting more focus on that. So if I toggle that all off and on, you can see it helps to bring the character out a little bit more from the image. Then I also think it could be cool to make the particles look a little bit like stronger, to give them a little bit of a glow, of like light, and we can get a little bit of purple back in the particles. Just to reference like the purple jewel that we do have. Then also for like the character itself, I think we can up the exposure a little bit, put a little bit more light on the character, in other terms. Also for the eyes, I want to go ahead and brighten that up a little bit. So you can see everything goes a little bit brighter, but the eyes especially. And then I do think like a tiny bit of a green, of like a green hue could help, because everything right now is looking very blue. And getting a little bit of green in there, I think it does look nice on the armor. But that's pretty much the preference. Then I also think it's cool if we can add like a little bit of a glow to the jewel. Again, it's just preference, but it will make the render like a little bit more exciting. That is like something glowing and just looks nice. I think we can apply the same logic to the eyes, make them glow up a little bit. And that way they're also matching like the jewel. That's a difficult word to pronounce, by the way. And then very optional is to add some black bars. I do think it looks pretty cool because you have a very cinematic looking render. So adding those black bars can just push that a little bit more. And we do have a lot of space like in between the border and the character. So we do have that option to edit. So yeah, final before versus after. I think it does a nice job of just pushing the character and all the hard work that you've done a little bit more into the spotlight. But yeah, like I said, overall, this project looks amazing. It's incredible. So really good job on it. So we have a nice little work in progress one. So let's go ahead and take a look. I think it's already looking pretty good. So I did a few small changes in Photoshop to go from this to this. No crazy big changes, but let's take a look at what we're changing. So the first thing I would adjust is the deflated sack. I would just make it nice and round, since it's a stylized piece. I would try to avoid having like deflated, like weird shapes. I would keep it to nice, simple shapes. Then the shoulder, I would just make that a little bit more symmetrical, because right now it's looking very uneven. I would over-exaggerate the size a little bit of the armor, so we have a bigger breakup in the silhouette. Same for the head, just try to get a little bit more shape in the silhouette. We can go ahead and add some bigger folds. And then for the cape, I would try to avoid having like two things end at the same line. So we can either extend the brown one or the green one, just to make sure they're not ending at the same line. And then the biggest thing for me is the sleeve. I'm not a big fan of whenever sleeves look like this. They have this very strong like vertical fold. So I would go ahead and break that up a little bit more, have some more complex looking folds. So maybe something like that, just to break it up a little bit. And it could be nice to add a little gold border to it as well to match the armor. So take a quick look at the before and after. I think this one changes the character in a very nice way. I think this change has a very nice impact. Then I think like the flaps over here, they're ending a little bit too close to the line here, in my opinion. So we can just go ahead and extend it. So there's a little bit more like difference in the level where those two elements end. So yeah, just a few small pointers, but overall it's looking very good and just keep on going.